Wyoming Territory, late September 1878, the wind had a bite by dawn. And by noon, Sheridan's dusty Main Street was near empty except for a lone cowboy riding slow past the general store, his hat tipped low against the sun. Landon McAllister pulled his horse to a stop when he saw a flash of movement near the back of the storefront. A girl, no, a woman darted from behind a crate, a worn shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, one arm clutching something close to her chest. He narrowed his eyes. Apples. She was stealing apples. She did not look like a thief. Her boots were torn at the soles, and her dress hung off her shoulders like it used to belong to someone twice her size. But her face, he would remember that face. Wide, worried eyes and sharp cheekbones, dirty but proud. She was young, maybe 20, and she moved like someone who had learned to be quick or else. He nudged his horse into the alley and dismounted quiet, his spurs barely making a sound. She was crouching against the wall now, whispering to someone. "Take 2 each," she said, and Landon's chest tightened at the sound of her voice. "Do not eat too fast or you will get sick again." 2 small heads peeked out behind her, a boy and a girl no more than 6 or 7. Their clothes were worse than hers. The girl's lip was split, and the boy had a cough that rattled out of him like stones in a can. Landon took a breath and stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said quietly, hands loose at his sides. She jumped up, putting herself between him and the children. "I will put them back." "You already ate one," he said, eyeing the half-eaten apple in the boy's hand. She swallowed hard but did not flinch. "Then take me to the sheriff, just not them." The boy tucked close behind her skirt. The girl followed. "They yours?" Landon asked. "No," she stood straighter. "They were left behind at the old rail camp. Their mother died last winter. I found them 2 months ago. You've been feeding them since." "I do what I can." Her voice cracked at the edges. "I clean boots, I chop firewood for the livery." "But no one hires someone who cannot read. I tried." She looked down. There was nothing left in the bin this morning. He looked at her hands. They were scraped and red with the kind of work that never ended. She could have run, she had not. "Tell me your name," he said. "Willa Sutton," he nodded. "Landon McAllister." She blinked, surprised by the introduction. "You hungry too, Willa?" She frowned. "That is not your business." "Maybe not," he said, "but I am making it mine anyway." He turned, walked back to his horse, and reached into the saddlebag. He came back with a cloth bundle and handed it to her. She looked at it like it might bite her. He unwrapped the cornbread, dried meat, and half a jar of jam. "Why?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "Because I saw a woman trying to keep 2 kids from starving, and not once did she think of herself first." She hesitated, then took the bundle, breaking it in thirds. She handed the biggest piece to the girl, the next to the boy, and only when they were chewing with wide eyes did she let herself nibble a bite. Landon watched her. There was something in the way she touched the children's hair, the way she kept glancing at the alley's mouth like she was waiting for trouble. "You got a place to stay?" he asked. She shook her head. "We sleep behind the depot." "There is a dry spot under the loading platform. You cannot stay there after dark. It gets below freezing this time of year. No one else will take us." "I will," she tensed. "Why?" "Because I have an empty bunkhouse and more stew than I care to eat alone." "You can stay until you get on your feet." "I do not need charity." "I am not offering charity," he said. "I am offering mercy. There is a difference." She stared at him. "And what if I say no? Then I walk away and you do what you need to do." "But those kids will not last the winter out there." She stood quiet for a long time, the wind tugging at her shawl. Then she nodded just once. "All right." Landon led the way to his ranch, just 2 miles south of town, where the land rolled gentle and the barn was full with hay and the bunkhouse had a stove and 3 clean beds. The children were asleep by sundown, curled together under a quilt Willa had stitched back together with thread from her pocket. She stood outside the bunkhouse, arms crossed, watching the sky turn deep purple above the cottonwoods. Landon came up beside her, holding 2 tin mugs of coffee. "Thank you," she said, quiet. He handed her the mug. "You do not owe me anything." "I know, but I still want to say it." He looked at her. The last light caught the edge of her jaw, the line of her throat. She had a strength in her that was not loud but steady, like water carving canyons. "You are not what I expected," she added. "What did you expect? A man who sees someone stealing and shouts for the law," he nodded. "I used to be like that." "What changed?" "My brother died 2 years ago, left behind a widow and 3 kids. She would not take help. Too proud. By the time I got there, the baby was gone." Willa looked down. "I swore if I saw someone struggling, I would not stay quiet." She looked up then, eyes soft. "You have a good heart, Landon," he smiled. "So do you, Willa." They stood in silence for a while, the kind that felt like something settling into place, not heavy, just real, and in that quiet, something passed between them. It was not about the apples anymore. It was about what mercy could build where judgment used to live. And neither of them turned away. The next morning, frost clung to the porch rail. The cattle in the north pasture stood still as fence posts, their breath rising in clouds. Willa stepped out of the bunkhouse barefoot, holding her worn boots in one hand. She moved quietly, not to wake the children, and crossed to the pump behind the barn. She worked the handle until water spilled into the tin basin. Her fingers trembled under the chill, but she washed her face, her neck, and behind her ears. Scrubbing away the dust gave her no illusion of refinement, but it steadied her just the same. Landon found her there, sleeves rolled, saddle blanket slung over one shoulder. "You'll catch your death without shoes." She looked over and gave a small shrug. "I didn't want to track dirt where they sleep." He set the blanket on a fence post. "There's a barrel of old boots in the barn, some might fit," she nodded, not answering right away. "Then I'd like to earn my keep." He didn't argue. "There's a milk cow needs tending." "She'll kick if you're slow." "I raised 3 back in Missouri," she said. "I can handle a temper." He studied her face, then turned toward the barn. "Come on then." Inside, the cow eyed her warily. Willa moved slow, speaking with low, steady words. Landon watched from the doorway as she settled beside the animal, hands practiced and sure. The rhythm of it was familiar, and her shoulders eased as she worked. Afterward, she followed Landon to the shed where tools hung in neat rows. He handed her a pair of work gloves and gestured toward the woodpile. "You split, I'll stack." They worked side by side until the sun climbed higher. She kept pace with him, sweat running down her temples, her hands blistering in the gloves. She didn't complain. When she paused to catch her breath, she caught him watching. "You're quiet," she said. "I talk when I've got something worth saying." She leaned on the axe handle. "You always live alone out here," he nodded. "After my brother passed, I stayed on to manage the stock. Neighbors help with branding season, but most days it's just me." "Doesn't that get lonely?" he considered. "Some days, but I don't mind the quiet. Gives a man room to think." She tilted her head, curious now. "Think about what?" "Sometimes the old days. Sometimes what I'd do different if I could." Willa looked down at her raw knuckles. "I think about that too." He didn't press. There was no need. Some things hung between people without needing to be named. That afternoon, she found a mending basket inside the bunkhouse and sat on the porch steps, stitching torn seams in the children's shirts. The boy napped curled against the barn wall, a slingshot dangling from his fingers. The girl helped Willa pull thread, careful and patient. Landon came up from the creek bed with a string of fish, dirt on his trousers and a sunburn blooming across his neck. He paused when he saw them. "She always that gentle?" he asked, nodding toward the girl. "She never used to speak," Willa said. "Now she hums when she's happy." He watched the child thread a needle without being told. "She's got good hands. They both do. They just needed time." Later, Willa helped prepare the fish, skinning and seasoning with a pinch of salt from Landon's cupboard. The children sat cross-legged by the fire, faces lit by the flames, their bellies full and their eyes heavier by the minute. As the sky darkened, Willa stepped away from the fire and poured a tin of coffee. Landon stood by the corral, arms draped over the fence rail, watching the last of the pink vanish from the clouds. She joined him, cup in hand. They stood quietly, the only sound the horses shifting in the straw. "You always knew how to run a place like this?" she asked. My father was a hard man. Thought a boy should earn his bread by 12. I hated him for it back then. He rubbed the back of his neck. Now I'm grateful. He taught me to survive. She sipped her coffee. I never knew mine. My mother worked in a boarding kitchen. She used to say, a woman who waits to be rescued will die waiting. Landon turned to her. She sounds like she raised you strong. She tried. Willa looked down at her fingers, the thread still caught beneath one nail, but she died before I could prove I listened. He didn't speak. Just stood beside her, the space between them quiet but warm, like a blanket freshly pulled from the fire. Willa turned slightly. You mean to send us off soon? No, she watched him, cautious. Then what do you mean to do? I mean to see what comes next. If you want to stay, I'll make room. She nodded slowly. I think I'd like that. He didn't touch her, didn't need to. It was in the way he stood beside her, steady and unhurried, giving her space to decide. And in the soft way she leaned just enough, her shoulder brushing his arm. The moon rose, full and pale. Somewhere beyond the hills, a wolf called and a distant owl answered. The ranch stood quiet, and for the first time in a long time, so did Willa's heart. The first snow came early, soft flakes drifting down as Landon rode back from the south fence line with his coat pulled tight and a rabbit slung over his saddle. He spotted Willa near the henhouse, sleeves rolled past her elbows, a feed sack balanced on her hip. The boy Caleb trailed her, dragging a stick through the snow while the girl Lena watched the hens with solemn eyes. Willa looked up when Landon passed the barn. Her cheeks were chapped, her braid loose, but she lifted her chin in greeting. I patched the roof over the coop, she said. The snow won't get in now. I saw, Landon said. You used the old cedar slats. They were dry and straight, figured it made more sense than letting them rot. I agree, she waited, then added, Caleb found a broken trap under the porch. He wants to learn how to fix it. Landon dismounted, tying the reins to a post. I'll show him after supper, she hesitated. You sure? You've already done plenty. He met her eyes. Doesn't feel like plenty. Willa didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Inside the kitchen cabin, she stirred stew thick with turnip and barley, humming under her breath while Lena rolled out biscuits. Caleb sat near the hearth, turning the broken trap over in his hands with a quiet reverence. As the fire warmed the room, Landon cleaned the rabbit and set it to roast beside the stew. Willa handed him a cloth to dry his hands, and their fingers brushed quick, but not accidental. You always cook like this? He asked. Only when there's flour to spare, she said, reaching for the tin of salt. Back in Missouri, I used to barter pies for sugar and eggs. It kept me fed through 2 winters. You have people there still? No, she said, tying the towel around her waist. Nothing left worth going back to. He nodded once, letting the silence stretch. Later, after supper had settled and the children were tucked beneath quilts, Landon lit his pipe and stepped out onto the porch. Willa followed, arms crossed to hold in the warmth. You ever think about what comes after this? She asked, watching the snow deepen over the paddock. I think about spring, he said. New calves, thawed creek, mending the west fence. I meant beyond chores. He looked at her then. You asking what I want? I'm asking if you've let yourself want anything that isn't just keeping things together. He rocked back on his heels. Most days, I don't know how to think past what needs doing. I used to be like that, she said softly. Until I started hoping again. Landon studied the slope of her shoulders, the curve of her wrist where it rested against the porch post. What are you hoping for now? She angled toward him, the lantern light catching a faint scar along her temple, one he hadn't noticed before. I want a place where I don't have to watch the door, she said. Where the children can grow up without sleeping in shifts, where I can leave something behind that doesn't vanish when the wind changes. He exhaled, slow and steady. That sounds like something worth building. Willa's voice dropped low. I don't want to do it alone. The wind stirred snow off the roof in a soft rush. Landon stepped closer, not touching her, but closer than he had before. You're not alone, he said. Her breath caught, but she didn't move away. You sure about that? I am now. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. Then I need to know something. All right. If we stay, is this just kindness or is it something more?" Landon didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached up and touched her cheek with the back of his fingers, gentle as brushing snow from a fence rail. "It's not just kindness," he said. "I've known that since the day you stood in that alley and dared anyone to take those apples back." Willa closed her eyes briefly, a quiet breath leaving her lips. When she opened them, there was no hesitation left. "Then I'm staying," she said. "If you'll have me, I already do." He didn't ask for a kiss, he waited. Let her choose. And when she reached for him, her hands steady against his chest, the kiss came slow and sure and without fear. Behind them, the lantern flickered in the window. Inside, the children slept deeply, the fire burned low, and outside, the snow kept falling quiet, soft, and full of promise. The days shortened fast after the first snow. Mornings began with breath fogging in the air and ended in early dark, the sun dipping behind the hills before supper pots cooled. On the ranch, the work didn't let up. Willa ran most of the inside chores while Landon handled the stock, but more and more they met in the middle quietly, like it had always been that way. One morning, as Landon loaded seed sacks onto the wagon for a trip to the mill in Dayton, Willa stepped out of the cabin with a list folded between her fingers. She didn't hand it to him right away. "I've been thinking about schooling," she said. "For Caleb and Lena." He paused, adjusting the weight of the sack. "There's no schoolhouse close enough to walk, and I doubt they'd take them in Sheridan without a father's name on paper. I'm not asking for a stranger to teach them." Willa unfolded the list and held it out. "I want to try myself. If you'd bring back a slate, a primer, and if they've got one, a reader with stories." He took the paper, eyes scanning her careful handwriting. "You never said you could read." "I couldn't, not until I was 17. A preacher's wife let me sweep their steps in exchange for lessons." She pulled her shawl tighter. "Took me a year to puzzle my way through a whole book." Landon folded the list and tucked it into his coat. "I'll see what I can find." When he returned that evening, he handed her a wrapped parcel that smelled faintly of paper and old leather. She opened it beside the fire while the children watched, wide-eyed. Inside were 2 slates, a pair of chalk stubs, and a battered reader missing its front cover. Willa turned the first page with reverence. "They'll learn," she said, "even if I have to teach them by lamplight every night." Landon rested a hand on the back of her chair. "I don't doubt it." The next week brought a cold snap. Ice rimmed the troughs by mid-morning, and the pump creaked in protest each time they hauled water. Caleb took to following Landon around the yard with a hammer belted at his hip, asking questions about fence knots and gate latches. Lena stayed closer to Willa, who taught her how to hem a sleeve and grind dried corn with a stone pestle. One night, Willa stepped outside while the children slept and found Landon brushing down his gelding in the lantern glow. She leaned against the stall door, arms crossed, watching the horse nudge his shoulder. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. He didn't look up right away. "Not once I got settled. Not even for something better. There's always something bigger, louder, newer." "But none of it feels like mine," she nodded slowly. "I used to dream about Chicago, thought maybe I'd find a boarding job, save enough for a room with a window." "Why didn't you?" "Too many miles. Too many men with promises that came with prices." He set the brush aside and stepped into the open space between them. "You think this is enough, what we've got here?" She looked up at him, her eyes steady. "I think it could be." He reached for her hand then, just one rough and warm from the horse's flank. "I want to build a house," she blinked. "You already have one." "I mean one with a porch wide enough for listening to rain, a place with a root cellar and shelves for books you haven't found yet." "I want to build it with you." She didn't answer at first, just turned her hand so her fingers fit between his. "Then you'd better make room for more beds. They'll grow fast. I already cleared the south field." She let out a quiet breath, not quite laughter, and stepped closer until there was no space left between them. "You sure you want all that?" "I'm sure I don't want anything else." They stood there while the lantern burned low, the air sharp with frost and something warmer blooming beneath it. Neither looked away. Come morning, Willa pinned a washed sheet to the clothesline with her hair loose down her back. Landon watched from the barn, hammer in hand, and for the first time in years, he didn't think of what needed fixing next. He thought only of the table they'd eat beside come spring, the voices that would fill the house they hadn't built yet, and the woman who had once stolen apples without asking but had never taken a thing that wasn't freely given. And he knew, without saying it, that she was his home now. The snow stayed deep into March that year. Each morning, pale light filtered through the shutters of the bunkhouse, casting long shadows across the plank floor. Willa sat at the small table near the stove, pages spread before her, Lena nestled against her side, tracing letters with careful fingers. Caleb sat cross-legged nearby, tongue pressed tight in concentration as he copied numbers onto his slate. Landon had gone to check the trapline in the lower ravine, and though Willa didn't say it aloud, she kept glancing toward the window, waiting for the sound of hooves in the yard. She taught herself not to worry, but the habit of waiting had set deep roots. When he returned, boots heavy with ice and a muslin bundle in hand, she met him at the door, drying her hands on her apron. "Rabbit," he said. "Fat one might stretch to 2 meals." She took the bundle and set it aside. "I'll stew it with onion and bay. There's still lard enough to fry the bones." He leaned against the doorframe, watching the children at their lessons. They're steady with their work. They're curious. It's different than hunger. Curiosity doesn't fade when bellies are full. He nodded, then reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. He handed it to her with a strange shyness. She unfolded it slowly. Inside was a small book, the cover worn but the spine unbroken. The title was faded, but the pages inside were whole. "I found it at the back of the mill store," he said. "Didn't cost much." She turned the pages gently. "It's poetry." "I wasn't sure if you'd want it." She looked up. "I've never owned a book that wasn't meant for someone else. You do now." That night, after the stew had simmered down and the children were asleep under the loft eaves, Willa sat beside Landon near the hearth. The fire popped softly and the wind had stilled outside, leaving only the hush of snow settling off the roof. She opened the book and began to read aloud. Her voice was quiet, almost uncertain at first, but it carried the rhythm of the lines with care. Landon listened, one arm draped over the back of the bench, his fingers brushing hers now and again as she turned the pages. When she finished the last verse, she laid the book in her lap and let the silence fill the space between them. "I never thought I'd read by firelight with someone listening. I never thought I'd want to hear poetry," he said. She smiled without looking at him directly. "What else haven't you thought of yet?" He reached for her hand, his thumb tracing the curve of her knuckles. "A wedding." "A proper one." She turned her head. "You're sure?" "I've been sure since the day you made stew thick enough to quiet a boy's cough and still had enough left to feed me." Her eyes softened. "I don't need a church or a preacher. I already sent word to Reverend Price. He'll come when the pass clears." She shook her head, not in refusal but in quiet awe. "You had it in your mind already?" "I did." She leaned in then, resting her forehead against his. "Then I'll marry you the day he arrives." April came with the thaw. The creek broke free of its ice, birds returned to the cottonwoods, and the soil turned soft enough to take a plow. Landon built a frame for the new house out by the south field, and Willa picked seeds from the catalog the post rider brought, marking each choice with a careful cross. They married beneath a cottonwood just as the first green leaves unfurled. Reverend Price stood with his Bible balanced on a crate, and Caleb held the rings. Lena scattered dried wildflowers from a basket while the wind lifted the hem of Willa's dress. She wore her hair in a low braid, tied with a ribbon Landon had found at the mercantile. He wore his cleanest shirt and boots polished with stove ash. There were no guests but the birds in the trees and the cattle lowing in the pasture, and that was enough. After the vows, Landon kissed her slowly, his hand at the side of her face, and the children clapped with quiet delight. Willa laughed softly against his chest, and for a moment there was no hunger, no fear, no past. They moved into the new house by midsummer. The porch faced west, and in the evenings they sat with coffee cups in hand, watching the sun slip behind the hills. Willa planted rosemary and beans along the fence and taught Lena how to tell a weed from a sprout. Caleb helped Landon mend harnesses and learned to track deer sign without scaring every bird for miles. By autumn, the shelves were lined with jars of preserved fruit, and a quilt Willa had stitched from scraps hung over the foot of their bed. The bunkhouse stood empty now, save for tools and storage, and the new house was filled with the sounds of a life fully claimed: chalk tapping on slates, kindling snapped for fire, laughter shared without hesitation. One night, as the wind began its long journey into winter again, Willa laid the book of poems on the side table and turned to Landon in the quiet. "Did you ever think we'd come this far?" "I didn't think I'd come anywhere worth staying," he said. She reached for his hand, laying it gently over her stomach. "Then you'll be glad we built the house with more than 2 bedrooms." His eyes widened, and then he smiled, slow and deep. "You're certain?" "I am." He drew her close, pressing his lips to her forehead. "Then we'll make room." Outside, the wind picked up, but inside the house, the fire burned steady. And in that room built from mercy, grit, and quiet hope, Landon and Willa lay side by side, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting over new life, the past behind them and the future already unfolding in the warmth they'd made together.